Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to read a comic. And the comic I'll be reading today is The Inhumans, number 3 from 1975. As far as my overall thoughts on this comic, I didn't much care for it. I just wasn't interested in the story it was telling. One weakness being the basic heroes themselves. I was never really a fan of the Inhumans. Their whole society seems so dysfunctional, and I just couldn't get into it. The cover itself is not particularly well drawn, to be honest. It's by Rich Buckler, and he's definitely done better artwork. I'm assuming Rich was kind of pressed for time and took a quick paycheck. Did not put a whole lot of effort into this cover, in my opinion. The design of the villain is terrible, but he's sort of an inconsequential villain. He never amounted to much. And based on the story, you would not expect it to be much, so they kind of just were like, yeah, just throw some shit together. We see the main cast of the Inhumans. We have Black Bolt, the leader. He's also the monarch of their civilization. Terrible leader. He's been overthrown so many times. I guess the alternative is worse. The next one is Gorgon. Gorgon is the bull guy. We see Medusa, who's my favorite of the Inhumans. She's really the only character I like from the group. And we see Triton. Triton's the fish guy. Triton is sort of the cautionary tale of the Inhumans and how dysfunctional their society is. This is the fish man. And he's kind of the Inhumans diplomat. I'm not sure sending a slimy, smelly fish guy is a particularly diplomatic move, but nevertheless, he plays that role. He's one of these guys who has intelligence and dignity, and at the same time, he's trapped in this fish body. So he's an example of where the Inhumans have, again, a really dysfunctional society. And anyway, they're being carried off by the mob. Most people in 1975 New York did not dress this way. Oh, I also have to add, there's Karnak at the very end. He's the karate guy in the Inhumans. So we'll get into the story. Panic in New York. Here we see the Inhumans. They're in free fall, so what had happened in the previous issue is carrying over here. Now, as much as I praised the writer for doing a really good job of giving these characters some personality, he makes kind of a big mistake here because one of the main characters, Triton, sounds like a complete dumbass. So the writer kind of made this character look like a moron, which I don't think is necessarily good writing. It might have been unintentional. I think it might have been an excuse to explain Gorgon's powers. Anyway, what Triton is saying, hey Gorgon, there's some shockwaves. Why don't you create more shockwaves that will counterbalance these two, which is a thing in the Marvel Universe, doesn't exist in reality. However, Gorgon is reminding Triton that, hey, we're in free fall. We're not on the ground. We're on this tower that just collapsed. Dude, what ground am I going to stomp on? So immediately, the writer, who is Doug Munch, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he was a young up-and-coming writer at the time. He was actually handling most of Marvel's horror stuff. And eventually, he became very popular doing that. And they sort of wanted to move him up the ladder and give him more and more important titles. So the Inhumans is sort of a trial run to see whether he can handle some of the more important titles there. And basically in the same boat is George Perez. George Perez is a comic book legend. He recently passed away. He had a great career. He was also a young up-and-comer at this time, and he was taking care of a lot of Marvel's karate stuff. And they wanted to see how Perez could handle dealing with some of the more important titles. because getting the product out and ready on schedule was very important to Marvel, and they weren't always good at that. So anyway, George Perez is the artist. And I think Mike Exposito is the inker. He was a very good inker. He always improved whatever he inked. That's one thing I noticed about him. So anyway, Medusa's saying, hey guys, don't worry. The lady got it. I got a plan. I can figure out how to save us. We also see Karnak, the karate guy. He's also a member of the Inhumans. And he's a somewhat normal Inhuman. I'll explain that later. So anyway, Medusa uses her hair to grab onto a ledge, and the other members of the Inhumans grab onto her. Unfortunately for Medusa, the slimy fish guy is wrapped around her waist. That must be horrifying. However, she doesn't have much time to think about it because the ledge gives way. So Medusa just got them a few extra seconds. Karnak sees that there's something below them, and it looks like Lockjaw. And Lockjaw kind of creates this force field which softens the fall of the falling Inhumans. So basically Lockjaw provided a safety net and saves the Inhumans. How the Inhumans aren't out of trouble because the rest of the tower is falling on them, and they have to do something quickly, and they do. And this is kind of a showcasing of their powers, so I guess the feeling is that if there were any new readers, they get an idea of what these characters can do. Karnak, he does his karate stuff, and he's the guy who knows the weakest point of any object, and he knows how to strike it, to break it. And he's the one regular Inhuman. And again, a little later on, I'll talk about their dysfunctional culture. Gorgon, the bull guy, he uses his hoofs to destroy this flying debris, highlighting his power. We see Medusa using her hair, highlighting her power against this debris. And we see Triton, he's just throwing punches at it, at the debris. So they're kind of just like letting readers know this is what these guys can do, power-wise. So anyway, the Inhumans and everyone else, they're trying to recover from this earthquake. I think Triton does something really gross. He rides Lockjaw, the dog that saved them, with the force field. He just rides him. I mean, do you know how bad that dog's going to be smelling? But whatever. Then we see two other members of the Inhumans. They're kind of fringe members. They're Quicksilver and Crystal. They got married in the Fantastic Four. So anyway, you see an ad here. There's quite a few ads. Nothing really much to talk about. Slim Jim ads. The Son of Origins. This is when Marvel, the very first time, they reprinted their stories in a trade form. This was considered kind of a landmark moment because comics had become so popular that mainstream publishing could not fail to notice and saying, hey, we can make money reprinting this stuff. And technically Stan Lee could say, well, when he was alive, that he actually was a best-selling author on the New York Times list because both these books went to number one. Of course, he didn't want to be thought of as a comic book guy, so it's sort of a double-edged sword. You know, he's getting the title of best-selling author, but he's not really authoring anything beyond stories for kids. So anyway, I would have loved that as a kid back then. We see a calendar for the upcoming bicentennial, 1976. Again, trying to make some money from these characters. Everything had kind of a bicentennial theme at that time. I think it was the advertising companies who pushed that because no matter whatever they did, they could just say, "Hey, we'll just throw some Revolutionary War stuff in it." You know, we'll have Thomas Jefferson selling paint. So anyway, going back to the story, Crystal's happy to see Lockjaw is saved. Lockjaw is the dog. Gorgon's like, hey, why are you making a big deal about this dumb dog? And this kind of like the other Inhumans are like, hey, asshole, that dumb dog saved us. Why don't you show some appreciation, fuckface? Gorgon's not having that. He's like, fuck that. Why are you paying attention to that dog? Suddenly, Black Bolt, the leader of the Inhumans, comes in. He flies very majestically. He definitely plays the role of like, the royal monarch. I just think he's terrible at it. We see Medusa and Black Bolt, they're together. They're married, so this is a husband and wife. Again, like with the rest of the Inhumans culture, this marriage is very dysfunctional because basically just one member of the couple can speak. The other just stares silently, and she has to kind of figure out what he's saying or what he means by his looks. That is so dysfunctional. They're recounting the story. Black Bolt is just doing stuff. He's just investigating. I have to be honest, I didn't really care what was going on in this story. We see an ad here for Big Jim's pack. This is, I guess, the G.I. Joe rival. I don't think they lasted more than a year or so. Never heard much from this. They have their own characters, like the Whip and the Apache guy and the Steel Hand. Yeah. Hey, G.I. Joe, look how successful that is. At least you gotta try to rip that off. So anyway, going back to the story, Black Bolt's still doing stuff. He's investigating someplace. And anyway, I don't really care what's happening there. Anyway, Gorgon, he's really angry. He's spouting religious, inhuman nonsense. He's talking about the mist. I won't be able to pronounce that name correctly. Terran, the Mist of Terran. Basically, what happens is Inhumans are naturally like born these almost perfect specimens as far as human standards are concerned. And there's a special chamber with the mist that if an Inhuman goes in there, the mist will transform them. And some of the transformations can empower a being, and but in very different ways. And sometimes you'd have like people who I felt would probably get screwed over, or felt screwed over, or like that person. You don't want to be that person. Like with Triton the fish guy. I mean, as admired as he is, people are like, dude, that's still a fish. That's a fish guy, and you don't want to turn out like that. And not all humans undergo this treatment. Karnak, the karate guy, he has not undergone that treatment, so his powers are kind of natural to being an inhuman. Medusa and Gorgon, they're having it out. I think they're trying to figure out what's happening with the Great Refuge. Medusa, she has memories of the Fantastic Four. She says she believes they have a device that could help them. Some of the Inhumans saying, hey, no, let's have Lockjaw, who has the powers of teleportation, teleport us to New York so we can go to the Baxter Building, talk to the Fantastic Four, see whether their device can help us. So the main members of the Inhumans, they travel to New York, and Crystal and Quicksilver are, I guess, left there to sort of making sure, hey, we're still in charge. Okay, so then we go off to a far-flung galaxy. We see what are Creed scientists, and they're discussing the Inhumans. And there's a reason why they would be discussing the Inhumans. And the reason is that the Inhumans were an experiment by the Creed. So, sort of like the Creed scientists, they're the ones who created the Inhumans, and they're debating on what to do with them, because their experiment can now interact with them on an intellectual basis, which is a little weird. I guess kind of think of a scientist who's experimenting on mice, and he gets the mice to be so smart that they can actually communicate with him on a one-on-one level. But the scientist is like, yeah, I understand you on an intellectual level and you can express your feelings, but you're still a mouse. It's kind of that weird awkwardness. Anyway, the scientists, they're debating. One wants to take a hard hand, the other wants to take a softer hand. The one who wants to insist on the hard hand, he wins because he has control of the weaponry. One of the scientists, he backs down, but nevertheless, he only backs down publicly. He's going to do some private action to fix what he wants to fix. Anyway, we see Lockjaw. He teleports the Inhumans to New York in the middle of traffic. And Black Bolt, who knows where the Fantastic Four's Baxter building is, he flies off. He's going to figure he's going to do what he has to do with them. And the other members are just going to wait there. However, them waiting there is causing an inconvenience to all these angry New Yorkers. And they're kind of arguing with Gorgon. They're really mad. Gorgon's taking this personally. He wants to show them something. Medusa stops him. Hey, we're not here to fight, bro. We are not here to fight. And then Black Bolt, he breaks into the Baxter building, kind of walking around, not finding what he's looking for. The rest of the Inhumans are trying to deal with this angry crowd of New Yorkers. Suddenly there's a space battle between two spaceships occurring directly overhead. So there's a lot going on here. Black Bolt, he notices the commotion. He kind of flies out of the Baxter building empty-handed. One of the spaceships does a kamikaze, goes straight for the Inhumans waiting for Black Bolt. They get out of the way, but the ship still crashes. Next we see the letter page. Talk about the letter page. This was issue 3. So at this point, they'd gotten some letters in, and at this point, they'd already gotten mail for the first issue. It seems like the fans are kind of happy. In reading these letters, these were definitely older readers. Younger readers would not have enjoyed this comic. Some of the fans expressed some fear because they knew Doug was their horror guy. He wasn't quite sure whether he could handle something in the superhero genre. They're saying, hey, Doug's doing a good job there. See the Marvel Value stamp. I have a book on that. It's a great book. See a promotion for The Land of Oz. I enjoyed the first movie, Wizard of Oz. I never watched any of the sequels, even though I heard some of them were really weird. We see an ad for Grit. Those were very common. They had a kind of a strange business model to me. I think their own product was basically a Reader's Digest knockoff. That's what it was. I don't know too much about it. You can be an architect if you're I guess if you're reading comic books, you like drawing. I figure you might get into this. So I can see where they thought there might be a market here. So anyway, Black Bolt's he's flying out of the Baxter building. He comes to the crash site of the spaceship. The second spaceship had already landed, and we see Medusa calling out a warning. I kind of am tuning out of this story. And we see our villain coming out. He calls himself Shatterstar. It's not well designed. This is definitely not a villain they were going to plan on using a lot. Just kind of a filler villain here. Looks kind of silly. He's well drawn by George Perez. It's just the design is terrible. And we see the other alien. He's also masked. He kind of looks like a penis head. Yeah, this was definitely done intentional. So you got Dickhead here. I guess we can call him. He's the guy who's for the Inhumans, and Shatterstar is against the Inhumans. These are basically those two Creed scientists that I didn't explain enough about because I didn't care about this story at all. So anyway, they're fighting. Shatterstar doesn't really want to bother the Inhumans, but if the Inhumans are in his way, he's not going to care. So that's what he's letting them know. and he lets go of a energy ray, and it's very very powerful. All the members feel it. Gorgon gets pissed because he's been attacked like this, and then he lets loose his bull powers. He uses his hooves to stomp and create this power shock wave that throws Shatterstar off. Gorkon's still pissed off. He's talking about his pride, his honor, everything, and he's putting everything into this fight. He's kicking Shatterstar right in the face like a horse would. Then Shatterstar's on the ground. Gorkon's about to finish him off with this power move. Suddenly Shatterstar recovers. He blasts Gorgon, and then Gorgon's unconscious after being punched. Gorgon, he's completely unconscious. He has this funny ass look on his face. You can he looks like you could just throw grapes in his mouth. The other members, they notice this. They say, this guy's powerful, but we still gotta stop him. Shatterstar fires a heat beam at Triton, the fish guy, which is a good strategy to do against the fish guy. Then Shatterstar feels Medusa's hair on him as Medusa's kind of wrapping it around him. She's being somewhat effective. However, Shatterstar is more powerful than she expected, and he flings her off and right into Gorgon, Karak, and then they're knocked unconscious. We see the Marvel bullpen. This is kind of like Stan's soapbox, and kind of, I guess, an editorial note to its readers. These things were so unreadable. I don't know who wrote these, but whoever did, this writing is dreadful. I was barely able to get any type of information because these little write-ups were just so badly written. I think the focus here is on Howard the Duck, who was a new character at the time. He was really hot at the time. Eventually they made a terrible movie about that character. So it definitely had a lot of wealth, I guess. And this is when it first came out. I wasn't really a fan of Howard the Duck. I thought, as an 8-year-old, I was deeply offended that Marvel would, kind of like take this not serious look at comics. And another new hero called Omega. Omega was a weird comic book. It was Steve Gerber, who did some amazing stories for Marvel, particularly with the Defenders and Guardians of the Galaxy. He created Omega, and it was just sort of this really weird idea of him being tied into this kid, and it was really hard to explain, and Marvel kind of took the ending away from him because he had not concluded Omega's storyline. And Omega, while it wasn't a big selling comic, nevertheless still had kind of a fan base, and a particularly smart fan base. So Marvel knew its smarter readers were reading Omega, and they were kind of upset that Steve Gerber was suddenly let go and not given a chance to complete his imagining of these characters, because I think years later Jim Shooter killed them off just for spite. So anyway, that's some of comic book history. We see some more comic book history when we see these in-house ads for Hostess. These were always fun to read, even though I hated how they infantiled the characters. In this one, Aunt May looks like she's being kidnapped at random. One of the kidnappers is like, who would pay $50,000 for this old goat? Like, why did you fucking kidnap her? So anyway, it appears that Peter Parker is going to go along and pay this $50,000 for old goat Aunt May. However, when the money shows up, Spider-Man's there. He has the case. Turns out they're Hostess Twinkies. Spider-Man, he takes off with Aunt May with the mask over her mouth still on. Guess even he doesn't want to hear her whining. And everyone's happy. They get Twinkies. So anyway, going back to the comic, we see some nicely drawn art by George Perez. He's doing it really good. He was clearly ready for the big leagues at this point. And you see Black Bolt comes into action, and he's kind of taking over. The crowd of New Yorkers, they're still pissed because they're inconvenienced. Dickhead is yelling a warning to Black Bolt, saying, what you're doing, it looks like you're winning, but you're not. It turns out to be true. There's kind of a backfeed of power. Black Bolt was just simply allowing the charge to grow greater and greater until he could not handle it anymore. And he lets go. And so basically all the Inhumans are knocked out unconscious. And, I think Gorgon, Gorgon still has his mouth open like that. And we see Shatterstar. He's like saying, hey, I didn't mean to kill you guys, but hey, you gotta go. And it kind of ends on that cliffhanger. You see some ads for Marvel merchandising. We see one for those Amigo dolls. Migo dolls. I didn't mean to say Amigo. Those dolls, I loved those dolls as a kid. I think I only had a couple of them. But nevertheless, I really loved them. I guess some more Marvel merchandising. Doesn't it looks like kind of just artwork, like coloring books. And we see an ad for Evel Knievel. I did get an Evel Knievel doll as a kid. He was still popular at this time. I think it was around 78, that's when his star really started falling in the public eye. So that's my review of The Inhumans, number 3, from 1975. Thank you, and I hope to have another review up soon. Bye.